We are halfway through the cinematic movie year, and we have discussed the best of the year so far, and now it's time to talk about the worst. I have seen many movies this year in the first 6 months, and not all of them have been very good. If you're interested to hear my list of the best movies that I have seen and the ones that are my personal favorites so far, I will list a link to that video in the description down below because that video is already up. But today, we're going to talk about the ones that did not impress me. I have 8 films that I'm going to list. So the following films I'm about to list, maybe some of them were your favorites, maybe you loved them. To each their own. These are just my humble opinions, and there's no shame in agreeing to disagree. And in my number 8 spot, we have Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar. Now, I will say, comedy is arguably the most subjective movie genre. There are so many comedies out there that I love, that people don't love. Maybe critics love certain comedies that I didn't care for. Everyone has a different sense of humor. And I wanted to love Barb and Star. I had been looking forward to this movie since before the pandemic hit, and it was delayed like so many other films. And I love Kristen Wiig, and I loved the premise of it. I thought that this film had so much potential, but personally, I felt the comedy was a little bit too dumb, a little bit too on the nose, a little bit too knee slapper, a little bit too silly. People say that it's good to not take yourself too seriously, and that's true. However, you need to take the material seriously. Even if you are coming up with things on the spot, you can't just settle for silly and take for granted that the audience has a little bit more of a higher intelligence level for comedy. I thought that this movie was just kind of spewing up jokes and punchlines so egregiously to where it's like, oh, laugh at this, this is bonkers, this is silly. And I feel like maybe I had to be on an acid trip or high as fuck to like this movie. And hey, I know people who did love this movie, but the comedy just did not sit with me. Yes, there were some things I did find funny. I see so much opportunity here, and that's why it did disappoint me how much I felt like it squandered that opportunity, in my humble opinion. In my number 7 spot, we have Earwig and the Witch. Now, for those of you who know me well, you'll know that I am a huge Hayao Miyazaki Studio Ghibli film. I love this studio so much, and much like Pixar, I feel like this studio has way more hits and very few number of misses. But Earwig and the Witch is, for me, the first egregious miss by the studio. My main qualm is the story. The whole story, it's like almost like 80-minute movie, something like that. The whole story felt like it could have been condensed to 15 minutes. And by the end of it, it's like, okay, now the rest of the movie should be taking off. But nope, this is the ending. I felt like the story didn't go anywhere. It was so repetitive. It was very tedious. And I'm not against simple stories, but this movie just felt like a first act. With how much they potentially teed up or alluded to with these characters in this world, I was expecting a lot more, especially from Studio Ghibli. It just kind of left me with blue balls. In my number 6 spot, we have The Dig. Now, this movie, you know, on one level, it's very forgettable. It hardly stuck with me at all. It is very kind of sad, but it kind of feels more of a slog kind of sad. Very low energy. You know, the actors do a good enough job, but it was also pretty discouraging how, upon looking at the true story and what this movie is based off of, how much they changed just for the sake of making more of a cinematic or romanticized story when really so much of it was not true. The pacing was very slow. I felt it was very dull. In my number 5 spot, we have Locked Down. I felt like this movie had potential. I love and respect Anne Hathaway and Chiwetel Ejiofor as actors. I felt like they had amazing chemistry. And the first, I don't know, half of this movie, when it's kind of purely around a marriage just falling apart and crumbling, that was more interesting. But then when it attempted to switch gears into a heist, I say that very forgivingly, a heist film is when it completely falls off the rails, and they don't even achieve the levels of thrills that you do need to make it a compelling heist movie. It felt like a hodgepodge of different ideas, from a destructive marriage to a heist movie to a drama to a comedy to a romance, all just kind of put into a blender and just hoping for the best, which resulted in a bit of a messy film In my number 4 spot, we have Moxie. Now, the reason this movie is so high up on my list is because when I was looking through my list of movies that I've seen throughout the year and I saw this title, I, for the life of me, could barely remember it at all. And I remember being awake for it and watching the whole thing, but I could barely fucking remember it. So I did research on it, I looked it up and tried to get some memory back as to what was this movie, what were my feelings around this movie, and that's its biggest criticism, is that it's completely forgettable. It completely just escapes me. It is directed by Amy Poehler, and the intention is there. The story is there, but I do kind of criticize the direction. I feel like the movie was very hammy. It was very surface level in tackling issues like feminism and adolescence and coming of age. But the movie just felt very spoon-fed. It felt very cheesy, kind of more on the level of like Freeform or Oxygen, if you will. No offense to those that love those, but that's kind of the vibe I got with it. In my number 3 spot, we have Tom and Jerry. Now, I know this is a children's movie, so to a certain degree I need to forgive a little of the effort put into it, because if it's intended for children, it's not intended for adults. Things are meant to be a little bit sillier. But this movie just felt like just a blatant little kid children's movie with characters being over the top and super extra, super not believable. It didn't even feel really intelligent. Like, Tom and Jerry classic cartoons were funny to me, and there was some simplistic intelligence in them. I would have preferred more of a Who Framed Roger Rabbit approach with the cartoon real-life people hybrid. But Tom and Jerry just felt like a cookie cutter, made to appeal to little kids movie. In my number 2 spot, and this is where I kind of wish I had a white flag, so don't come at me, but my number 2 spot is Mortal Kombat. Now, I argue that you probably have to be a die-hard fan of this franchise to find any reason to love this movie, because I feel like this movie was only made for die-hard fans, which is not a smart business move when you're in the world of wanting to bring on new fans to franchises. I felt like this movie took for granted any audience members tuning in to watch a movie where they don't know the source material. But despite not having the history behind it going into Mortal Kombat, I just felt like the acting was so poor. The story was very confusing, and they didn't even get to the Mortal Kombat fight that they're all talking about. This movie just felt like one giant fucking prologue to a much better movie, and I think they were banking on the fan base established so that this movie would make enough money to make a franchise out of it. And I'm sorry, but I felt like it was almost like Dragon Ball Evolution bad sometimes. And I think that there is so much potential in the Mortal Kombat franchise to make a great film out of it. They were banking on people just loving those sprinklings of things that they thought familiar, and hope that they didn't notice that the movie itself was really fucking flawed. That was just me. And in my number 1 spot, the worst movie I've seen this year so far is Yes Day. And yes, it's one of those things where, again, I don't think I'm the demographic for this movie. However, this movie was egregiously bad, and I love Jennifer Garner. The only good thing about this movie is that Jennifer Garner is on screen for like 85% of it. But then it just made me angry, and it made me disappointed in that she wasn't in a better movie. And I know she produced it, and I know that there's a family audience out there that did respond more positively to Yes Day, but I felt that Yes Day took the cheapest way out in terms of jokes. It took the easiest way out in terms of plot development. It settled for super safe, super surface level, super dumbed down jokes, over the top performances, basically kind of like a straight to DVD level of all of those movies that you never watched, that were never in theaters, but they went straight to DVD. Jennifer Garner was the only saving grace. I would call this movie pretty unwatchable, and that's just me. And there's my list of my least favorite movies, all 8 of them this year so far. I understand if some of you love some of these movies, to each their own. So I'm gonna go now before I ruffle too many feathers. But as always, thank you all again for tuning in. And until next time, I'm Ryan Baimey signing off. Bye everyone.